Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Intentionally Act Live. My name is Dr. Atyia Martin, and I'm the CEO and founder of All Aces Inc. And I am so excited today because we have an amazing guest named Stacie Jones. So let me tell you a little bit about Stacie Jones. She has been in government for over 30 years and counting. Her experiences have led her to pursuing a PhD in organizational leadership. So we'll talk a bit about that today and what she's learning through her research. Her thesis really is on the visibility of women of color in executive leadership. So we're looking forward to talking a bit more about that, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how the untapped potential of underestimated groups is impacting our organizations, and what we need to do to change within our organizations and within different industries. But in this case, we're talking to someone who has many, many years in government, but also has been paying attention to what's happening in the field. So I am very, very, very grateful that Stacie has agreed to join us and is going to share her amazingness with us today. And so, what I would like to do is ask, as we always do, is ask Miss Jones, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I'm excited to be here with you. I'm so excited for this conversation today. Been looking forward to it for quite a while.
Oh, wonderful. I'm so glad. And, one of the things that we try to do is double check in. And so, how are you doing for real, for real?
Yeah. So for real, I am excited that the start of summer has started. My
Mhm.
sons are out of school. Yay, them. And we're having a little bit of a relaxed time getting started with the summer. And I am almost finished with this PhD program. So I'm extremely excited about that. So for real, I'm doing really good. Thanks for asking.
It is my pleasure. Thank you. And, to remind our viewers, that is one of the ways that we practice collective care at All Aces Inc. And so I will also share how I'm doing. I'm actually feeling feeling really grateful today. Um, it's been a really long year for all of
Mhm.
us, and I'm still involved in some work in the city of Boston on the ground around helping to ensure that Black people in Boston get vaccinated because our rates are so much lower than the rest of the population in the city. And I bring that up because it's been a reminder of what's possible. It's been a reminder of my capabilities and capacity
Mhm.
more than I think I expected. And it's also been a labor of love, and I've gotten to know myself even more through the process. And so I'm feeling really grateful that I get to be in all these different spaces. With all of that said, let's jump right on in. And so, one of the things we like to ask folks when we are doing these shows is kind of what made you fall in love with what you do. And so, earlier, I think I referenced it during our prep session as kind of your origin story.
Mhm.
How did you fall into this kind of work, and what keeps you in it?
Good question. First, let me give a caveat that so everything that I say today is my own opinions. It's not affiliated with where I work or anything. But just to kind of go back to how I got started with this work, I think it kind of has been a theme that has run through my life for a long time. My father was in the service in the military, and we were in Naples, Italy, and I was young at that time. But I remember being a cheerleader and being invited to, or not being invited to, the end of the season sleepover. And all of the young ladies that I was a cheerleader with were white. I guess I was about 6 years old. And I just couldn't understand why I was
Mhm.
not one of the ones that was invited. My mother at that time was like, well, if you go there and you're uncomfortable with anything, you just call me. And I remember she picked me up the next day, and I was trying to figure out what was so different. And I think that about me that, I couldn't They wouldn't play with me while I was there. You know, when I would go into one room, they would run into the other. And that kind of, I think, said something to me, and at a really young age impressed upon me that there were differences that existed, and that people would treat you differently, and you may not really understand the why of it, you know. So that's kind of my origin story. And just when I got into the field of work, recognizing the same sort of thing. It's just I've always tried to create spaces where people can bring their whole selves to work, because that's always what I wanted. You know, I wanted to be able to be authentic in a space. I wanted environments that would be comfortable for me to feel okay in, and environments weren't always that way. And so I think that is what has led me to stay in this work. Is to continue to try to create those spaces and I'm also a coach. And so I try to coach individuals who are in these spaces, and trying to help them to what I call stand out on purpose, and try to help leaders create these spaces for people to be able to contribute. But I love the work. I love the idea of being able to make change for an organization, and partnering with people to make the workplace better. Because, you know, we spend so much of our lives in the workplace that it makes sense for the space to be inclusive, and so that all of us belong, so that we can all contribute to a better society.
Thank you for that. And you said something interesting that I just want to ask a clarifying question on. You said you enjoy helping people through your coaching work that you do stand out on purpose. What does that mean?
So I've found myself throughout my career being the only one, being the only woman of color, being the only leader at the table who's like me. And it's a very othering experience, is what it's termed. You know, trying to fit into that environment, trying to make sure that your message is heard. And so what I've come to know is that there's a reason why I'm in that space. I have something to contribute, and that my voice needs to be heard. And so I help individuals who find themselves in those spaces to stand out on purpose. Yeah, you might be the one standing out, but there's a reason why you're there. Your voice does need to be heard. And what you have to offer is of value to the organization, to wherever you are. So my coaching is around that, helping people to recognize their true gifts, being able to contribute whatever it is that they need to find within themselves to make it show up. So that, like I said, we all have gifts to contribute in this world. And if we're not contributing them, then we're doing ourselves and society a disservice. So I help other people stand out on purpose.
Thank you for saying that. You know, the way you kind of landed that reminded me of a quote I heard, I read maybe last week, where, and I won't remember who said it, but they basically were saying that no one has a right to exist on this earth and not figure out their purpose, their place in it, and leave an imprint on it. Right? And I'm paraphrasing, but the power of being able to better understand ourselves, right, our own strengths, build our own self-esteem, which a lot of people misunderstand what that means, right? And as people of color in particular, when we're talking about racism, there's this whole piece around, you know, what folks call the imposter syndrome.
Yes.
Which really is more like the imposter experience.
Yes.
Right? Because every human being experiences it at some moments of their life.
Yeah.
However, when you are part of an underestimated group, and then when we're talking about racism, when you're a person of color or BIPOC, it really is a more amplified experience, right? Because there's so many messages that are telling you don't belong.
Yes.
There's so many messages that reinforce, right? And so as you're trying to navigate and do the calculus of all the stuff you were talking about, like what, trying to figure out your way, there's this whole other piece of managing ourselves internally in our own inner narrative and what we're and meaning what we're telling ourselves about ourselves
Yes.
and what other people think about us or whatever. And so thank you for surfacing that as something that's critical to this work, because we don't talk about it enough and we don't spend enough time on it. The last thing I'll say in this point is the we have a tendency of talking about issues of racism and other forms of oppression in a way that centers the groups that are in that are kind of considered dominant groups, right? So when we're talking about racism, we center white people. When we're talking about kind of sexism, we center men, and so we never get to these more sophisticated, nuanced conversations that are about, well, how do I, as a Black woman, navigate in the workplace? As someone who is on the receiving end and still trying to accomplish my goals and hold on to myself in the process. So thank you. And so one of the things that we know about you is you have a very long and illustrious career. And so I'm really curious about building on this conversation around what you have done around diversity, equity, inclusion work, kind of particularly with the focus on racism, anti-racism, advancing racial equity, that you feel like has, well, let me stop there. What are some of the things that you've worked on? And then we'll talk about, some of the things that maybe have been the best and some of the things that we're still struggling with in organizations.
That's a really good question. So yeah, I've been in this work for probably about more than 15 years, and particularly in the D&I space. And along that way, we've done one thing that I'm really proud of is bringing diversity dialogues to a couple of the organizations that I've been in. I feel like one thing that the government does well, or has recently done well, is establish these executive orders. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but President Biden has established that, has helped us to realize that, yeah, racism is real, right? Yes, it exists in organizations. It's structural, it's institutional, and we need to make an assertive attempt to dismantle it. And so before he came out with this executive order, we were doing a lot of D&I professionals across the government. We're working to try to surface these conversations. It's challenging in an organization or a federal environment or government environment, as I'm sure you know, you've done this work as well. But it's challenging to do this, but we were able to do it. I was able to do it anyway in a couple of organizations that I've worked with. It's just to have conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion. And these are conversations that are really personal, right? It allows you the time and space to get to know who you are, what your understanding of race is, what your understanding of difference is, and how that might play out in your interactions with people in the workplace. And those things have been very successful, and just kind of getting people to understand that all of us are involved in this conversation, whether we want to be or not, and that we all have something to learn from each other. And so to be able to have these dialogue sessions, we've had conversations around the George Floyd murder. We've had conversations around just policing in general, LGBTQ, all types of everything diversity. We've had conversations around. And I think that some of those surfacing those conversations and allowing for people in the work setting to have them and to better understand who it is that they're working with has been one way that we've been working to move the needle in the D&I space.
Thank you for saying that. And I'm curious, just as a follow-up, how have we're talking about having these conversations about issues that people think they know because they hear the words a lot, but we don't really know, even as people of color, right? When we're talking about racism, for example. And so how has the response been that in your experience from employees who think that it's inappropriate to be talking about these issues, these political issues in the workplace, especially in the context of federal government.
Yeah, so we've gotten feedback from some individuals that have not been, in agreement with having these conversations.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel that it's my responsibility as a leader of DNI is to stretch people, to stretch organizations, and but I must say though that you can't do that without the support of leadership in the government space.
Mm.
Having that support is very, very important. So luckily, I've had that. There have been times that I have not had that, and when we talk about challenges, we can go into that a little bit more. But I think that whenever we're gonna embark on this conversation of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, we have to recognize that people in this conversation are going to be uncomfortable. And we have to get comfortable being uncomfortable, because this is our society that we've lived in has covered up a lot of things up to now. And these millennials and these newer generations they're really not having it, and nor should we any longer. It's time to open up this black box that we've put all of this stuff in, and have these conversations so that we can heal as a society and be able to move forward and create a better society, a more inclusive society, better workspaces for all of us.
Thank you. And it's funny in part of that kind of you focused on your responsibilities in it, right? And the importance of having supportive leadership.
Right.
And so when you're in those situations and you have someone who's saying, I don't want to talk about this, we shouldn't be talking about this, what have been the best strategies for you in being able to deal with like those people in particular? So you have leadership, right? Support. You have the fact that your ultimate goal is to help stretch people, facilitate that growth and development. What are some of the strategies that you use in those conversations with people?
I question a lot, so I put my coaching hat on and ask questions to try to arrive at what's under that. So I might question if someone says, like someone did one time, I don't think that we should really be talking about unconscious bias in the workplace. I'm not a biased individual. I'm not racist. We don't need to have this conversation. And so I might question that. Well, what are your thoughts about why do you not want to have this conversation? What's uncomfortable about having the conversation? So that we can kind of tease out and get at the root cause of what's driving that perspective. So I usually putting my coaching hat on. If it's a longer term deal, I have to tell you, I partner with people a lot. White males sometimes think that they're not a part of this conversation. So I invite my white male friends to the party. I need your help with this engagement. And people that are understanding, and get them to partner with me, and sometimes even putting them on committees, getting them to lead in the effort. Because just having, like I said, being in spaces where I've been the only one and working with a largely white males organizations and white men in leadership positions. Sometimes they don't want to hear the message from me. And I don't care how they get the message. I just want them to get the message. So if they need to hear it from one of their peers who looks like them, then so be it. So I've had to adapt and learn how to collaborate with all types of individuals. And I think that I do that in service of the organization as a whole, but in service of people who are like me, who might not have felt like they belong in a setting, or who want to contribute, but don't know how, who don't feel like they're part of the workplace fully and can't be themselves at work. I think it's incumbent upon all of us to make it so that each of us can bring our talents, and whatever I need to do that, I'm willing to do so.
Thank you. It's funny. Two things actually before I go there. So one is thank you to Dr. Laborowski, I hope I'm saying your name right, for joining us today. It's good to see your name again. And then Stephanie Harris is saying that this is right on time and that she's watching from National Harbor, Maryland. Welcome,
Hi, Stephanie.
Stephanie. And so, from a kind of where you led off in that part of the conversation was that, these conversations and the issue of racism and other forms of oppression impact all of us, right? It affects all
Yeah.
of us. And there's a framing around racism and people's understanding of it that centers, um, uh, kind of the deficits of people of color as opposed to the fact that racism is harmful to all of us in different
Right.
ways, right? So, we know all the ways. Well, we all don't know all the ways, but many of us who are watching this are familiar with many of the ways that racism is harmful to people of color,
Yeah.
right? Um, we don't oftentimes talk about how it's harmful to white people, and not in a reverse racism kind of way. People have heard me say this before, but I think it's an important point to raise here, which is the motivation, or one of the opportunities for motivation for white people to engage more with the workplace, with talking about these issues in the workplace, is because racism, in the same way that racism paints people of color into boxes and says, well, if you're Black and you're African American, then you're this way. And if
Right.
you're Black and you're from the Caribbean, then you're this way. And if you're this group, then you're this way. And those are the constraints that we are supposed to live by. And in the same way, white people are also in boxes of constraints. It's just called normal.
Yeah.
Right. And so you're expected to kind of do all the things that it means to be a good American, right? To be the bar of normalcy for everybody else, and you're kind of the default. And in essence, it means that there's a set of standards and expectations from you too that you didn't decide for yourself.
Right.
And so the exploration of peeling back those layers of how racism has infected you as a white person, so that you can figure out who you really are, who you really want to be, right? And work towards that, as opposed to the blinders of kind of going along to get along, right? Just going with the flow, kind of what Nietzsche referred to as kind of herd mentality, right?
Yeah.
And so thank you for surfacing that. And then the other thing you started to go into, because I want to reaffirm this, the questioning process, right? So like that coaching approach to when someone comes, even though we're frustrated, right? Because I want to acknowledge that this stuff is hard, right?
Yeah.
So we're taking a developmental approach, even when we are impacted
Yes.
by the positions that people have taken, or their lack of understanding, or whether it's a lack of understanding of themselves, the issues, why it's important to the work, all of those pieces. And so there's a part of this that's, as when you're in the DEI space, that's about kind of having to navigate ourselves, so that we can be effective and stay focused on the goal at hand. So the questioning process was your default answers where you went to, and the amount of self-management that is happening as you're going through that process because of the potential answers people may be giving you when you're asking those questions.
Yes.
So I want to stop there, and then I want to come to two more points that you made that I think are really important for the audience to understand.
Yeah, Atyia, thank you for raising that, because there was a couple of points that you made that I wanted to get back to as well. The understanding that that white men are in this journey with us is really a point to hone in on, because like I said, they often don't feel that way. So me having to manage myself to help them to understand that is a real thing, right? It's a real thing in the diversity space, because my mind says, why don't you get this? But like you said, not seeing that that they are a prototype, through no fault of their own, but that they're a prototype for for leadership, period. Not just white leadership, but leadership. The standard is white male, then it's probably white female, and then everybody else just kind of gets, wherever they fall out. But we're all trying to ascribe to the standard that has been established by society, that leadership should look like this. And generally, it's, the white male, be tall. They're usually, research has shown that they're tall, that they're big, they have a, all this sort of look. And anybody who deviates from that is kind of like not normal for whatever reason. But just the notion that we're all trying to survive in this space, survive and thrive in this space, is one thing that kind of brings us all together. All of us are trying to do that. All of us are trying to belong, including white males. So they've been othered at times as well, which is one of the reasons why they feel like there is a reverse discrimination type of thing going on. It's not all the parties to the table. There's enough for everybody to eat.
So let me say this, because I know some viewers are watching and they're like, whoa. What are you talking about, Stacie Jones? They've been othered. What are you talking about? Talk a little bit more about that.
About being othered? Okay.
About white people, white men in this.
White men being othered. So I'll use a white gay male. Okay. So, and I've worked in law enforcement environments, a large portion of my career. So in that environment, a white gay male would be othered. Okay. Because they are not the norm. The norm is a white heterosexual male, particularly in a law enforcement space. So when you look at this, you have to look at it through the lens of what is my organization? What is normal for my organization? There might be other organizations where are predominantly women. And so a male might be othered in that environment, right? So you always have to look at it in the context of what organization, what's predominant within that organization. So that's what I mean. So, but we have to understand that, period, is that depending on the circumstances, everybody has felt that way, regardless of who they are, what they look like. Everybody has had that feeling. And that's what makes us uniquely connected and invested in diversity and inclusion and equity. We all have a vested interest in ensuring that happens in our workspaces.
Okay, thank you for that. And so what I'm going to say to kind of connect the dots for folks, so if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like you're talking about the intersectionality of identities.
Yes.
Right. And that, so when you're the prototypical white male, right, there may be some experiences that you've had, maybe growing up, where, you were the odd person out. But when you're talking about us in the work environment as adults, excuse me, that you actually have white men who also have these other social identities that once they are known, right, create types of experiences where they are then having those experiencing the stings of oppression through the way that identity is showing up, right?
Yeah. Right.
So thank you, and I just wanted to make sure that we were clear about that. And there's two more things that you said earlier that I think is really helpful to the conversation, especially if we're talking about like, what do we do? Right? How do we get to action? And how do we, in the process, kind of respect everybody's humanity? And so one of the things you talked about as a reason why folks struggle with wanting to do this kind of work in organizations is, and by the people, I mean the folks who you're trying to bring along with you in the organization to do diversity, equity, inclusion work, is this idea of, well, I'm not biased, so, this doesn't make sense, because are you calling me biased?
Right.
And so there's a concept that I think is helpful for folks, because even sometimes when we know better, our default instinct is that, because we are trying to protect ourselves, right? Because there's nothing comfortable about accepting our human flaws, right? The human condition, which comes with the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so naive realism is what's showing up here, right? Which is this idea that, we have a tendency as human beings to think that we don't have bias.
Right.
So it is the bias of thinking we don't have bias when we all do.
Right. Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And it gets in the way of a lot of times of us being able to move the work forward, because our lack of humility and willingness to accept who we really are,
Right.
but as individuals and collectively in organizations, can get in the way of our ability to do this work well, or even to start the work.
Right.
And then the last uh, uh, thing that you mentioned that I wanted to be explicit about is having accomplices or allies,
Yeah.
right? Because there's some danger involved. And so when there's a ton of research around, the fact that, when issues of racism are surfaced, that white people can hear it better from other white people. Then they're going to hear it from
Yeah.
us as people of color. And because it gets translated as complaining.
Right.
And so the whole point gets lost.
Right. Absolutely.
So what did Outkast say? The doper that I got, hold on, in one of their songs, no, Goody Mom. No, Outkast said that. But basically, we were talking about how, his grandmother was telling him that, the realities of life and of dealing with other people. Really, part of this is about looking at ourselves in the mirror, being open, being honest about who we really are, what the real goals are.
Yeah.
In the process that we're trying to accomplish, and how we can get in our own way of trying to accomplish our goals. And so I want to acknowledge some of our viewers, because they are super engaged in this conversation. And so Erica, early when we were talking about kind of some of the reasons that people don't want to engage in DEI work within the organization, she said, and it's about insecurities. Right. And we understand, that part of this work and part of the realities are that oftentimes we tend to separate racism into its own bucket as if it's an island into itself, when it's intertwined and entangled with our just human stuff that gets in our way. And so when we feel inadequate, when we are struggling, when we as people are, really just having a hard time, the easiest thing to do, which is usually the default thing we do, is to find someone to blame. And so racism becomes the easiest thing I can observe, that I can blame for why certain things are playing out, whether it's societal, or whether it's in the organization, or whether it's in a situation, right?
Yeah.
It's the go-to.
Yeah.
So thank you, Erica, for that. And I don't know if you want to add anything. It looks like you were trying to do
there. Because one thing that I having worked in EEO and diversity in the government for quite some time, usually I had found that, and up until a point, that most of the complaints had come from people of color, that had been discriminated against. Until I got to one organization, and white men were the ones that were raising the majority of the complaints using the EEO process, which was alarming to me, right? But it's just what you spoke about, is that how trying to use racism as a way of blame for what happened to me, or especially for in a majority dominant environment, that notion of race is something that I'm going to use to be able to kind of buck the system or what have you. So that is a real thing. But like you said, if we're not having a discussion about bias and realizing that we all have it, then we've missed the boat. And that's one thing that I think that the government has recently done well, is having these discussions and training around unconscious bias to help people have the same baseline and understand that, yes, everybody has them. It's okay that you have them, but you just need to manage them, right? And teaching people how to manage their biases. And another point that you were saying about the individual versus the collective, is that, we've all kind of grown up in this Western society that is more individualistic, right? But racism is a collective problem. And, we've been saying is that we need to be able to see it in order to dismantle it, right? Because we have to be able to see that this exists and it does affect me. It affects everyone.
Thank you. So much. So right. what I will say though is you just hit on something that that I literally just was revisiting this morning, which is this focus on the collective. Mm-hmm. So it turns out, y'all, the research is very clear about this, that when an organizational culture emphasizes employees' shared fate, the fact that they're all going to succeed or fail together as a group, diverse teams of employees are more productive and creative than homogenous ones.
That's right.
Now, I want to give context to that because, there's a lot of research that's come out and said, oh, diversity is the answer. So if you just have diversity, then magically your company's going to make more money and employees are going to be happier and all those things. Well, that's not true. There are conditions required to benefit from diversity. And one of the foundational kind of requirements to being able to really see the full fulfillment of what diversity can offer is the organizational culture and what we actually do in practice. And right. So to your point around people being able to see that interconnectivity, the context of what I just read is about the generically speaking, the organizational culture. But when it comes to dealing with issues of racism and other forms of oppression, it's the same concept. If I can't see our shared struggle, that this isn't just about saving people of color, or this just isn't just about, hate. And so I don't hate people, so that doesn't have anything to do with me.
Right, exactly.
When we go deeper, right? Like we can understand the complexity and the layers and start to really deal with the actual problems, and instead of kind of being in fear or being ashamed, which gets to something that one of our viewers posted. So we have a Stephanie Harris says that as a positive psychology coach and intercultural inventory administrator, Stephanie, you're going to have to tell us more about what that is so that we can make sure that we're learning. That's a lot of words, and I can guess what that means, but we'd love to learn more about that. She says that, she has to get many dominant culture clients to move away from feeling bad or ashamed, and that our job is to create awareness of harmful patterns, not to make them feel good, right? Then this gets to that point of, this gets to something we haven't actually touched on, and I won't dwell here too much, except to say, like, there's sometimes that we as people of color, BIPOC, have a tendency to think that, for lack of better terms, coddling people is going to be the thing that helps them, right? And so, and we don't want to do that,
no,
right? Because that doesn't help anybody grow, right? It doesn't help us grow as individuals. It creates weird dependencies and codependencies. And so really the goal is to help people see it for themselves. And there's something you said that reminded me of a quote that the wonderful Julie Wormser, who's over at the Mystic, let me see if I can get this right, Mystic River Watershed Association, Myra. Okay, I did it, barely. But we were out to lunch one day, and she said, she's a white woman, and we were talking about racism and all the stuff, and she said, this was a quote she shared from a different context, but totally applicable. She said, "You have to believe it to see it." Right? We often say you have to see it to believe it, but you have to believe it to see it, right? And which becomes kind of part of that learning process. And many of us or struggle to be able to actually see it. And when we do see it, sometimes we struggle to name it. So like have words to express what just happened. The other post that has been shared by one of our viewers, Dr. Laborowski. The work that you're doing is high level. As a woman, you're operating in a space that is the right zone where you're shifting the trajectory of the further where we are, or in order to further where we are, turn the tablecloth and reset the table. Our future is bright. If I may remind us that our ancestors have nursed white children. This is a prolific moment as you're redirecting our power.
Wow. That's a very powerful statement. Thank you for that.
Yes, thank you.
I got chills when I read that, that our ancestors nurtured white children, right? So we can take that corollary and into this work, right? It's one of the things that you had mentioned was about, you had touched upon was being a BIPOC and in an environment with trying to teach and educate others about this work. Sometimes we're seeing, and what I've seen a lot recently is that people are feeling uncomfortable or weary of being the expert. It's because a lot of times we are the only ones in a space. Especially as you go higher up the ladder, you're the only one in a space, and somebody may be looking to you, your peers, your white peers, might be looking to you as, well, why did they think that? Or, you be on the diversity committee, so you can be the voice of everybody else. And I understand that we may get weary of that position, but we also must take advantage of it. If there's something that we can contribute to better educate other people, to get all of us on the same page, then if you can, take it as your responsibility to do that and do it responsibly, right? Because we know that they're learning. But if we can, and if we're given an opportunity to, then let's take that and try to move the needle wherever and however we can do that.
And I also want to come back to this piece around making sure that we as BIPOC are nurturing ourselves.
Yes, self-care. Right. Yes, exactly.
So, exactly. And I'm going to come back to this concept of collective care we use at all ACEs. That's really about how do we create the space for people to actually take care of themselves? Mm-hmm. How do I, as an individual, with my colleague, actually help create the space for them to take care of themselves? And how do we help create the space to take care of each other? Right? That there's this collective care that's necessary in order to do this work well. And it kind of goes back to the whole concept of, when we are clear about our shared fate, mm-hmm. And we're nurturing collaboration and interdependence as opposed to competition. Yes. Internally, right? Like that actually doesn't yield the best results. And so I just wanted to kind of lift that up in this conversation. I also want to give a shout out to Erica, Jennifer, Pamela, Shaniaka, for watching. It looks like we have folks from DC, from Fort Washington, Maryland, from Hermitage, Pennsylvania, from Upper Marlboro, Maryland. So thank you. I have family in Baltimore, so I appreciate all our Maryland folks. I was stationed in DC. Appreciate our DC folks. And we have one of our wonderful Team All Aces members who was out in Pennsylvania as well. So awesome. Thank you to all of you. And Stephanie Harris is also sharing, one voice is better than none. Yeah, so sometimes I think that's reaffirming. Sometimes we have to be the one mm-hmm. out there to kind of ring the alarm. And I want to say this too to our fellow BIPOC folks, that it is okay not to have to jump in there all the time and try to be Superman, Superwoman, mm-hmm. Super person in these situations.
It's hard. Yeah.
It's hard. You want to talk about that a little bit more? You got riled up a little bit.
I did, because it's that's funny. Just the challenge of it, when the challenge of trying to navigate your own feelings about everything that's happening in the world. I remember when Philando Castile was killed. I remember when, Michael Brown, all of these different instances, and I have Black sons. So going to work as a chief diversity officer in a law enforcement environment where nobody was saying anything about these things that were happening in our society, because dealing with that, having to acknowledge that my people, these men who my sons will turn into one day, right? That my sons are going to become men who may have to address this at some point, are vulnerable. And I'm working in a space where nobody is acknowledging that this is happening, and it's my job to help them understand why this is important. But nobody's having this conversation, and so the reality of that, it hits home, knowing that you have to overcome your personal feelings about something to be able to inform, educate, bring awareness to an issue that people don't want to hear. And going home every day is a struggle, to recognize that, I may not, the people that you're working for, that you're supposed to be working to benefit, that they may not want to hear what you have to say. And, but knowing that it has to be said, and that it's supposed to be said, and that you're doing the right thing. So yeah, you have to take care of yourself. You have to take care of yourself, and you have to learn when it's time to, or appropriate time to speak up, and when it's best for you, whether politically small p, or politically it's okay for you to say something, and just having to navigate all of these different dynamics is something that's important. So it requires a lot of reflection, a lot of coaching, a lot of self-care. It really does, because it is a struggle. And I don't think people outside of this work recognize that dynamic or that aspect of it.
Yeah, it's there's a lot there. I think, one thing I've learned in my life is the fact that we have limitations, right? As human beings, like resilience, we often talk about it as being, a tool to be leveraged at the individual level to navigate difficult situations. What we don't oftentimes talk about is that it is a limited supply. And so you can tap it out.
Yep.
And we can burn ourselves out. And especially when we are trying to, do a million and one different things to shift the dynamics. And so for many of us, part of this is about getting to learn ourselves too, so that we can no, there are times where, I know I'm not in a headspace to be developmental and I need to take a step back.
Right. Yeah.
And that's just real. And that comes with being a human being. We can't be 100% of the time.
That's right.
And for each of us, the way that we show up looks different. And that's okay too. I struggle a little bit, and I oftentimes get myself in trouble. Oftentimes get myself in trouble because, I almost sometimes have an allergic reaction to people trying to pigeonhole what people into what it looks like to, be anti-racist, or what it looks like to fight oppression as a person of color, right? So it's like, if you're not marching or protesting, or something very public, maybe you're Twitter activist, I don't know, but it's like the things that folks are like, oh, you were doing the thing, and I'm not saying devaluing those actions, and it's also important that we understand that there's an entire universe of actions that we have available to us in order to shift the dynamics, including the work we need to do on ourselves, including being in certain spaces and learning the context of different fields and industries that are impacting our communities and showing up in those spaces when we have the privilege to do so, to advocate in ways that help move the needle forward, to impact policy, which requires a whole nother set of layers of action, particularly when we're talking about organizations, which brings me to my final question, which is, you know, we oftentimes are overlooked, and I mean BIPOC people, Black, Indigenous, um, um, Asian, Latinx, that we're oftentimes overlooked. People can't see us for who we really are and what we truly bring to the table. And so I'm curious in terms of what are some of the strategies that you have tried to bring to the organization to help leadership see the talent and value that all of the employees, especially underestimated employees, bring to the table?
I'd have to say that sponsorship programs, not mentoring, but sponsoring, is something that I'm working towards. I've done mentoring programs before. I've done internships and things like that. And I find that those are valuable. But it seems to me, it appears to me that when an individual, a leader, sponsors an individual or someone that pulls them under their wing and actually shepherds them through to get them to another space or wherever it is that they want to go in the organization, that is more effective. I was recently on a call with some professors at the school that I go to, and one of the professors was talking about how she had been tapped for one position after another position after another position, and it was a white female, and that tends not to happen for people of color. We don't get tapped on the shoulder to get moved along to one position or another. So I think that for us, if there are executives, people of color that are in leadership positions, then you need to sponsor someone. Look for potential talent. Look at whatever it is that you can do to bring that individual up under your wing, so that we can get them in position to be able to move them forward. Everybody doesn't do it, and if the majority is not going to do it, then we need to.
Thank you for that. And there's something that we hit on that I actually want to come back to. So in the beginning, during our introduction, I mentioned that you were in a PhD program and what you were studying. And so I want to come back to that because some of the things that you're learning in that process are pretty profound. And I want to make sure that people understand the context that the work that you're doing is adding to the discussion.
Thank you. So I'm doing my dissertation is on women executives of color in leadership positions, women executives of color, their experiences of invisibility and hypervisibility in these environments where they're often the only one, right? So they're often at the table with individuals who are not like them, what those experiences are like, how they deal with those experiences in that social dominant environment. What I found so far is that these women who are very capable, they really just want to come in and do their work. They've had to conform to an environment at times, had to try to change and adapt themselves in order to make, as we've been saying, other people feel comfortable. And so the work that takes, is the emotional labor that's involved with that, is very exhausting for these women. Yet they come to work, they do it every day. and their stories are not being told. And so my dissertation is about them. It's about the work that they're doing, and not the technical work, but the work that they do just to show up every day in public service, do all of this work for all of us, is very important. And I feel like it needs to be highlighted.
Thank you. And is there anything in particular that you've learned during the course of your research that you feel like it is particularly important for people to be exposed to?
A couple of things. One is that, as we've been saying, we don't want to coddle individuals to come to the conclusion that that racism is real. We don't want to do that. We do want to inform them. And so I think that one of the things that I've learned is that we need to figure out ways to kind of open up that box so that people understand that that this diversity discussion needs to continue. The other thing is that we are losing talent, resources, contributions, knowledge of the individuals that we think are invisible. And so our work is to make sure that they are seen, and the work of leaders is to make sure that we're tapping into the potential of this underestimated group, so that we can get the mission done every day in service of our society.
Thank you. And Dr. Melendez has said, Stacie, I would love to read your dissertation. We share research interests. So we'll make sure that you get connected with Dr. Melendez so that you all can chop it up offline. And then I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. I hate mispronouncing people's name. So Shuniaka Johnson says, creating spaces, having uncomfortable conversations, listening to understand and not to respond, right? So these are some of the basic principles that we have talked about that undergird this conversation.
Yeah.
And one thing, I find really fascinating about racism is how we don't oftentimes talk about how expensive it is. And I don't mean just in terms of cost in dollars, but it becomes something that distracts us from the ultimate goals we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
So if we want to have organizations that are successful, that are thriving, that means we want employees that have what they need to be successful and to thrive. And anything that is getting in the way of our employees being able to do that thing is going to impact our ability to accomplish our mission and our goals in the ways that we want to within our organizations. And it's unfortunate that racism has become a thing that's so odious, so heavy, so omnipresent and invisible all at the same time.
Yeah.
Like in the same space, in the same room. And when I was talking about some of the waste of racism, I'll be explicit. So we talked about the waste of talent, right? A lot of wasted talent.
Yes.
We waste a lot of resources in terms of time, the amount of time that we waste in trying to justify things that shouldn't be justified, the amount of time we waste in trying to avoid dealing with the thing that is at the root cause of the challenges that we're dealing with, the wasted time of trying to protect people who shouldn't be protected, the amount of we waste so much time. Yeah. And there is a monetary impact, right? This society, there's been some research that's done that says this society loses billions of dollars a year because of racism and the way discrimination impacts people, and the lost income in certain contexts and the lost productivity and other contexts. And then when you think about turnover in an organization,
Mhm.
right, that's a cost associated with that every single time. And so the point of me saying all of that is to land with um, the opportunities that we have in our organizations to actually stay focused on the goals, stay focused on the mission, and which allows us to be able to put in the work that it takes to stay focused on those things and to always be checking ourselves for when we may not be on course to be successful. So I just want to say thank you for being here with us, Stacie. Thank you for all of our viewers today. We appreciate you. Thank you, Erica, for adding generational debt. And it is with great honor and pleasure that I also say thank you to Stacie Jones for being with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Martin. I really appreciate it. And I have enjoyed this conversation tremendously.
Thank you. Thank you. Me too. I hope everyone has a great rest of the day. Sending lots of love, hope, and intentional action to each and every one of you. See you later.
Bye-bye.